Hello, my name is China, and in this lesson I'm going to be showing you the top 7 things you should try when you start watercolor painting. This week's video, I'm going to show you how to take it back to basics with your watercolors. So grab your paints and let's get started. So make sure you've got the following pieces of equipment before we start. We want watercolor paper. I'm using scrap. You can see that there's some splashes of paint already. Then we need some water, a rag, a watercolor palette with a lid that we can mix our colors in, and a paintbrush. Now this is a size 6, so make sure you have that before we begin. So the first thing we want to do is get used to our paint. So pop your brush in the water, choose a dark color, and give it a nice wiggle on the side, not up in the sky. Once you've done that, pop that on your lid, and you'll see that it's really nice and thick and juicy, and that's the level that we're aiming for. So once you've got that ready, we can start by painting a little square. So this should be a very dark square because it's basically taken straight from the pigment. Once you've done that, we want to clean our brush. So I want to go dab, dab, dab right on the bottom. Dab, 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 dab. And then tap, tap, tap. So I'm just scraping off the excess. And then I'm taking my brush and pulling the paint to the side so I can see how much pigment I'm mixing in with the water. Then I want to go for another square, and you'll see that it's a completely different shade. And then I want to do the same again. So dab, 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 tap, 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 tap. And then remove that again and pull that paint to the side. So this should leave us with a third shade, which is dark, medium, and light. So imagine this one as 90% pigment, 10% water, 50-50, and then maybe 10% pigment or 20% pigment and 80% water. So that is our first exercise. Number 2, the next thing we want to do is figure out how much water we need and what that looks like. So dip your brush in the water, and all you want to do is a little square, another little square, and a final little square of paint. If I show you from the side, we have a mountain of water, a bit of a hill of water, and then what I like to call the grassland. So we've got loads of water, it's super saturated. We have something in between, and then we have a really flat surface area, and it's just looking damp. So it's hard to see, and it's hard to know what it feels like to add color. So I want you to do the same again. Lots of water, medium water, flat water. So don't pick up any more, just use what you've got. And then introduce a color. So I'm going to mix this. Ready? So I'm going for a medium consistency. And all I want to do is just dab a few dots in, just to see what happens to the paint, because painting is all about observation and feel. So we want to see what the difference is. The first one is kind of suspending the paint in the water, so it's not quite grounded. We don't know what it's going to look like, and it's uncontrollable. The second one, there's a little pile of water down here, so all the paint is pulling towards it. And again, once it dries, we're not sure how it's going to look. The third one is spread more evenly. It's easier to see what it's going to look like, and it had a bit more control. So each of them have their own purpose, but we use them in different situations, and we need to get used to knowing how much water to use and how much paint to include in it as well. Our third exercise, we want to get a color. I'm going to go for this orange, and I'm trying to see how long the color will last. So I'm going to go for a line down here, but I'm going to paint it left to right. So keep going left to right until your brush runs out of juice, runs out of steam, and just see what happens. So we get a bit of a textured dry brush down here, and we have quite a higher intensity of pigment up here. So it's created a little gradient. So give that a go and see how far your brush will last. Number 4, we are going to make this next one disappear. So grab a new color and then get that ready in your palette. And I want to work really quickly. So I'm going to add the paint quickly, dab my brush, clean it, and then try and pull that paint down. So I want to make that disappear so it's a nice gradient in a shorter space of time. And if you need to clean your brush again, by all means you can, and drag that down so we can't see the bottom of the paint. So if I show you from another angle, you can see that this gradient helps the paint disappear into white. It's a little bit shiny, so there we go, that's a bit better. And you can see all that water down there. Now, whilst we're here, I want you to touch this the third square that we painted and see if you can feel the temperature. Is it warm, is it cold, or is it the same temperature as the paper? If it's the same temperature as the paper, you know that that is dry enough to do another layer on. If it's cold or feeling a little bit damp, definitely like this one, that means it's not ready to paint on. So always check the temperature of your paints. Okay, so our next exercise involves two colors, so get them ready. You can choose any colors you want. I'm going to go for red, and I'm just going to wake up this purple again. Add a bit more. Okay. Now this technique is called wet on wet, and it means that our paper is wet and then we add our wet paint. So what I want you to do is find that medium consistency of water, and then I just want you to paint a little square that's about 1 inch or 2 or 3 centimeters wide. Make sure you spread that water across evenly. Then pick up your paint. So I'm going to go for the purple first. And I'm going to go from left to right, left to right, left to right to the middle. And I've got a big pool of water there, so I just want to soak that up with my brush a little bit. And then pick my red and go from left to right, but from the bottom. Bring that up, do a couple of strokes across there. Again, too much water. And then I just want to let that dry. So the science behind it is the water is drying, it's going to pull that paint, make it intertwine, and then it's going to be a very nice blended edge with those two colors. So let it dry, and let's try another one. So I'm going to prepare another color. I'm going to introduce yellow, and then I'm going to bring orange. They could look very similar, so I'll alternate the pattern, and I'll use red again. So let me try and wet my paper first. Check it from the side to see how wet it is. Perfect. And then I'm going to go yellow first. Make sure I've got a good amount of pigment there. Let's go from the bottom this time. So we'll go to the middle. Clean my brush. Dry it a little bit. Pick up the red. Go 1/3 of the way up. Clean the brush. Dry it. And then pick up that orange. And then top to the middle. So if you find anything is looking a bit odd or unblended, use a dry brush just to go up and down and let that dry. So whilst these are drying, let's see if we can do it with dry on wet, which means our paper is dry but our brush is wet. So let me choose a different color. I'm going to introduce this green, and I'll use that purple as well. So what do I want to start with? Let's start with the purple. Make sure I've got enough pigment, and you've got to work really quick. So purple, clean the brush, dry the brush, pick up the green. See if we can get to the middle before it dries. Yes, nice. Okay, so let that dry, and then we'll talk about the differences between wet on wet and wet on dry. So the pros of using this first one is the damp paper gives you more time, especially if you just want to be a bit more cautious and a bit slower. So it gives you an opportunity to soften the paint and nothing will dry and give you those harsh edges. The downside to this is because you're adding pigment and water and there's already water on your paper, it's almost like twice as much water. So the color intensity is a little bit thinner, meaning it's a little bit paler. The pro to working wet on dry is the colour intensity is much brighter, so you only have to do it once, but it does mean that things are at risk of drying too quickly and you end up with harsh lines. So, depending on which situation you're in, you can decide whether to go wet on wet or wet on dry. Number 7, let's try and draw a straight line. So you need to get a fairly thick paint. I'm just going to use black for this one. And you want to use the tip of your brush. So you can see it's a fine, fine line there as if it's a pencil. And I want to make sure my wrist is nice and comfortable. And I want to try to avoid pushing down at all. So it's hard to talk and draw at the same time because when you talk, your body shakes. And it's made it very, very wobbly. So let me try that again without speaking. There we go. So essentially what I've made is an ink. Nice thick paint. Painting with a quill, just like the old days. And then we have these lovely, lovely lines. So if you want to, you can try and write your name. A little bit thick, but you get the gist. So try these 7 techniques to help you get familiar with your watercolours, improve your basic skills, and then you'll be ready to paint anything. Thanks folks, and I'll see you next time for another lesson.